New mandate for Michael McCormack. He's been re-elected Nationals leader today, and as he reminded us, that's the third time he's received that endorsement in 2 years, and it's left Barnaby Joyce to lick his wounds and work out where to from here. Let's get the latest on where the numbers fell with Andrew Clennell, my colleague, our political editor. Andrew, let's start with what was at the party room of 21, and we thought beforehand it could be as close as 11-10. Where did the numbers end up?
Yeah, well, it looks like it's more about 13-8. Certainly McCormack supporters are trying to tell me 15-6. Joyce supporters are saying 11-10. Let's have a look here if we can look at some of the numbers. Potential voters for Joyce here. And there's 8 that are seen as solid, if we can bring that up, or reasonably solid. They were Joyce, Christensen, O'Dowd, McMahon, O'Brien, Canavan, Gillespie and McKenzie. There were 2 who Joyce thought was coming his way. We're not so sure now. That's McDonald and Littleproud. So certainly it looks like there could have been 8 votes there for Joyce. Close enough for another push perhaps, and there's very much a feeling too that a couple of votes came back, which also would give Barnaby Joyce some hopes. Obviously he's saying, I won't challenge again, but no one believes that. Interesting
from Littleproud, he's the deputy, seen as a future leader, and he was in a difficult position, obviously, trying to navigate both sides, because as it turned out he was endorsed as the deputy, and I would assume, we don't know the numbers because they destroy the ballots, but we assume by a pretty big margin.
Yeah, I mean, I think he won deputy by a big margin. I think both McCormack and Joyce would have been happy to have him as deputy. I think he was one of those who might have just decided, I'm going with where the winning side is, perhaps.
Let's recap what Michael McCormack and David Littleproud said after their wins in the ballot.
We're going to move on, and we're going to work hard together, he and I and the rest of the National Party team, for regional Australians. That's what regional Australians expect, that's what they deserve, and that's what they'll get.
Did you ask him whether he'll challenge again?
No, I didn't. I don't expect him to challenge again. I've been endorsed as the leader. I was endorsed as the leader when we came back here after the May election last year. I was endorsed as the leader when he stood down in 2018. So that's 3 times in less than 2 years. I think that's enough to warrant me leading the party going forward.
This is about now back to business. The shenanigans are over. It's time to get back to looking after those people that are facing drought, that have faced up to these fires. It's time for us to focus on them, not us.
And David Littleproud, it's been a tough summer, but he has performed extremely well. His colleagues have noticed it, and he's a future leader. Many think, including myself, that that's the case. Let's look at the cabinet and the changes, because is this, the question is, going to be a big ministerial reshuffle, or is the Prime Minister going to just make a few minor changes?
Really a belief that Darren Chester and Keith Pitt come in as part of the deals, and that perhaps Chester will want emergency management, might get agriculture and Pitt resources. No change to the Liberal portfolios, I'm hearing. Interestingly, because they don't have a minister in the Senate, McKenzie will remain Senate leader, but I'm told that's an unpaid position, so she's just doing it for the love of it or for the party service there.
Today, a big focus on the fires, the condolences. It wasn't a good look. It was quite stark, the difference between a party having a leadership ballot and a popularity contest at the same time that the Parliament paused to remember the bushfire victims. Let's hear a little of what the Prime Minister and opposition leader had to say in their contributions.
All were brave and had lives that meant so much to those around them. At the funeral of Jeshri Keaton, there was a coffee mug. A mug no different than most of the dads here have sure seen at some time. It was a mug that was placed on Jeff's coffin, and it had the words, "Daddy, I love you to the moon and back." Jeff's son Harvey was 19 months old when he lost his father.
The devastating impact of a changing climate seen around the world and felt, touched and smelt by Australians hundreds of kilometres from the fires. What the changing climate and the changing expectations of future events mean for the way that we structure our response.
The opposition leader there, and the Prime Minister with quite a powerful contribution as well, Andrew. And the Royal Commission, we know who that Royal Commission is going to be now.
Yeah, Mark Binskin, a very emotional speech as Mark Binskin, a former Chief of the Defence Force. Very unusual to have that rather than a judge. He served in Iraq in 2003. He was a former head of the Air Force and a pilot, basically running a Royal Commission. I've got some information on the terms of reference put to the states. It does mention climate change, but it's not a big feature. It talks about hazard reduction, I understand, infrastructure, building back better, and Commonwealth state responsibilities and how that's divided up in a disaster. That's what the federal government wants the states to agree to in terms of the terms of reference.
But it does include climate change.
It does, but it's not a major part of it, as I understand it. There's a lot there about resilience, the sort of things the PM was talking about in his press club speech.
And well, the interesting thing is, Andrew, because this remains not just an issue of great debate around the country, but within the coalition party room, the Liberal party room, and when they joined together with the Nats this morning, this was an issue where they fired up quite a bit.
Big fire up. So basically in the Liberal party room, Andrew Lamings was seen to have a go at Jim Molan without naming him for his comments on Q&A. Let's have a look at Jim Molan's comments on Q&A about man-made climate change. Do we have that?
As to whether it is human-induced climate change, my mind is open. Michael might say that the science is settled, and I very much respect scientific opinion, but every day across my desk comes enough information for me to say that there are other opinions.
What is the evidence that you are relying on?
I'm not relying on evidence, Hamish. I am saying...
So in the coalition party room, Scott Morrison said we need to stick together and we will prevail as a government. And then this stouse breaks out afterwards. He had to leave halfway through to visit the relatives of the victims of the fires. But essentially Barnaby Joyce and David Gillespie said, don't believe climate change is biting out there. It's not a massive issue. That in our seats we're not hearing about it. That's when others got up like Trent Zimmerman and Tim Wilson and Katie Allen and said it is biting in our electorates, and Fiona Martin. And Trent Zimmerman said, you know, we should have Warringah, we don't because of this issue. And George Christensen said we need a coal-fired power station in Queensland. There are 5 seats dependent on it, so it really shows the stark division that Prime Minister Scott Morrison has to manage on this issue.
It's a huge division, isn't it? And we've known about that, but it's again on show. And on the day when it could have been exacerbated if Joyce were to win the leadership, Andrew, because if Joyce were to win the Nationals leadership, you would imagine he would be a much thornier proposition for Morrison to deal with, the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, to deal with, including on the coal station, on the coal-fired power station, but more broadly on that issue of climate change.
So he says he's going to focus on his electorate. He's putting the gun in the holster, but at the same time he's up in party room agitating. It doesn't really line up, does it? I mean, Fiona Martin, the Liberal MP, got up for a new Liberal MP for Reid, and she said there's been a step change in her electorate's attitude over the past few months, and climate change is starting to register as an issue.
Andrew, great to get information from the party room, as always. Appreciate that. We'll